Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome to yet another installation of TMA Talks, a podcast that is supposed to be as regular as I can make it on the channel, on my channel, the Muslim Apologist. So today we have our Jewish brother all the way from America by the name of DOOOVID. I'm not sure how should I address you, sir, but welcome to the show, sir.
Oh yeah, thanks for reaching out. Great pleasure. Duvid is just a Yiddish pronunciation of David, David, Dawid, and they're all basically the same, but the pronunciation is slightly different. And on the social media,
Correct.
people usually write DUVDID, but social media you can't get the name you want, so I ended up with the 4 O's. So been Duvid for over a decade.
Then DOOOVID it is. So maybe DOOOVID, perhaps you can share with us your background and your studies in Judaism. How your what has brought us to this point now? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I grew up in Metro Detroit, and kind of a secular Jewish family. My father's not even Jewish. My mother comes from a Jewish line, but it was Reform. Uh, her grandfather's grandfather was a Reform rabbi, and actually participated in the 1893 World's Parliament of Religion in Chicago as a rabbi. And I had, whatever reason, a big interest in Judaism as a child, and started like Reform and then studying. And after high school, I wanted to go to Israel, and I went to Israel, and I ended up in Orthodox and then ultra Orthodox yeshivas, study houses, and I spent 3 years studying in Israel, and I ended up in what's called the Mir Yeshiva, which is the biggest, one of the most respected Orthodox yeshivas in Jerusalem. And after that, I spent about 10 years, and I got involved in Hasidic Judaism, which is a little strain on like a mysticism or spiritual, and also that tended towards neutral on Zionism or anti-Zionist, even though it was in Jerusalem. And then after that, I spent about 10 years living in New York City, mostly in Hasidic Brooklyn, but also in Manhattan. I went to Stony Brook University, and there I continued Jewish studies, and I served as an assistant to some of the major rabbis in Brooklyn, and sometimes a driver, just whatever they asked. And I was involved in some communal affairs on a whole bunch of different levels. Also went to university, civil engineer. I do property management. I mentioned I sell books on eBay. And about already 15 years ago, I moved back to Metro Detroit, where I came from. And I tried to spread Judaism. I worked together with basically everyone, Chabad to secular to Reform, any way possible. And originally, I created my YouTube page to promote a synagogue, teach people the basic prayers, like how to say the Hebrew prayers and some chants and communal events. And about 5-6 years ago, I got involved in streaming through a man in Hollywood, California, named Luke Ford, who's a convert originally from Australia, but he's a streamer involved in different forms of media. And through him, I got involved with, God forbid, the rise of the alt-right. And I ended up debating and arguing with some of the prominent alt-right critics of Judaism in America. Some big names like E. Michael Jones and Richard Spencer, and a lot of the big names that were in the alt-right at the time. And I've continued to do that over the years, like Keith Woods, and in streaming. If you found me from a debate with Daniel Ikwakachu, so I've
Yeah.
continued that in discussions. Also, so I've been doing interfaith for about 15 years. I started in Stony Brook University in New York, where I met a Sayyid, a Pakistani descendant of the Prophet. And we were in university, and we start talking about the eschatology in the Quran versus Judaism. And he ended up working for this organization, Children of Abraham, that was actually out of Dubai. And so New York City, I was going to interfaiths, and I went to a lot of mosques in Queens and downtown Brooklyn, and all different sorts, from
Mhm.
the Shia, Sunni, to the name slipping me now, the Indian one that is considered a variation of Islam. They also have a lot of good
You mean
literature.
the Qadianis?
Yeah, the
The
Ahmadiyas.
Qadianis.
I mean,
Yeah.
they have very good introductory literature. They're very outgoing. And in Metro Detroit, I also have been doing interfaith for over a decade. I have that on my YouTube page, and I was part of a group that we went every 2 months to a different house of worship, which included synagogues, church, Hindu temples, and mosques. And that includes, we went to, Metro Detroit. There's like some unity, Shia, Sunni, and um, Nation of Islam, Black African Muslims. So I'm relatively familiar. I've been having dialogue with Muslims for over 20 years. I've read the Quran over 4 times, in different translations, and I have like 50 books. I was showing
Wow.
my YouTube I've read a lot on Islam relatively, and in Judaism, like I've been studying Judaism seriously full time in Jerusalem and New York. I spent 5 years of my adult life just full time studying Judaism. I've been through the Talmud. I have over 1,000 books in my personal library in Judaism. Plus, like over the years, I constantly study Judaism. I love Judaism. That's one of my passions. I also like philosophy. I'm an engineer, science, and other issues. But unfortunately, I've always leaned anti-Zionist. And since October 7th and the war, it's put me at odds with Judaism. Even someone who likes Jewish rituals, I could lead prayers and study the text. And however, Zionism is extremely dominant, especially in Metro Detroit. In Hasidic Brooklyn, there was a large group, and in Jerusalem of anti-Zionist. And I lived among anti-Zionists, but in Metro Detroit, there's very few anti-Zionist, and most Jews don't even understand Jewish anti-Zionist. And unfortunately, it's put me at odds. And so at this point, I'm kind of without a Jewish community due to my anti-Zionist leaning. So I'm happy to talk about any of these things, discuss just pure theology. If you want to know, the best of my knowledge to explain what different schools of Judaism or the sages or text or interpretation, or my experience with Islamo-Judeo relations, either theologically or political or economic or anything. Obviously here I'm in Metro Detroit, that has one of the largest Islamic populations in America. Like I know some Malaysians. I went to University of Michigan alumni. I'm not sure if there's that many Malaysians in Metro Detroit. There's a handful, especially at University of Michigan.
Yes.
There were a decent amount of
Yes.
Malaysians, but I don't think Malaysians are one of the prominent, relatively of the Islamic communities that are here in Metro Detroit.
Yeah, I had an uncle who once went to the University of Michigan. So yeah, it was in the 60s, I think it was in the 70s. Yeah, so there is a number. There's actually quite a small number of Malaysians who have had contact or who have had studied at the University of Michigan. Although it's honestly speaking, it's not really one of the top universities of our choices if we want to study in the States. It's not really that well known, but we do have people from Malaysia going to the University of Michigan. Yeah. So you were talking about your experiences with Islam. Maybe we can talk about that a bit as well. So you mentioned that you have read the Quran at least 4 times. So what's your impression of the Quran based on the translation?
Let me say, like, my opinion, like, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to assess the Quran. That it matters what I think about it. But I felt moved in meaningful Islamic literature. Like, it moved my heart, compelled me to fear God, to be a better person, to take my life more seriously. Like certain, I've done the the Juma, the different prayers a few times, and the statement like prayer is better than sleep. So like I definitely gained a lot of insight and inspiration to be a better person, especially like in a God-fearing, compassionate way. I have my own interpretation of, from a Judaic understanding, how Islam is not true in the way a Muslim would be hold that it's true, but true in some sort of Judeo fashion. That from a Judeo perspective, it's very difficult to, or you can't really call Muhammad a prophet. But there is the concept that Ishmael was promised 12 princes, and that Muhammad, is from these 12 princes or some of the text, and that Islam is clearly part of the unfolding of the Abrahamic tradition. So we could talk about how some of the Kabbalists and the Judaic sages understanding the unfolding of Abrahamic prophecy in the Quran, but would be in obviously slight disagreement with how Muslims would see it. But so I gained insight in that manner, and then just as a I'm belief in multiculturalism. I started in New York the first time I read the Quran, and you're just someone who wants to get along, treat people the way they want to be treated, and in order to do that, you have to know about their cultures and their beliefs. So just in terms of that, like obviously Islam's with Christianity, the biggest religions in the world. So, even if I didn't personally gain from it, just out of respect to be able to treat people the way they deserve to be treated. And like I mentioned, the first thing I did with Islamic interfaith was comparative eschatology of the end of days. What does Islam hold that's going to be at the end of days? What do Jews hold at the end of the days? What are the similar elements? And what are the contradictory elements? And I say that's my specialty of interfaith, is to just kind of break that down. What do we agree about? What do we disagree about? And just put it out there kind of in a respectful way. Like, with all due respect, I can't accept this, from my belief system, and, just kind of be upfront about it. And then we could agree, lay out what we agree about and what we disagree about.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My internet just suddenly went, crashed out. I crashed. I don't know. It's happening it's happened for the past few days actually.
Okay.
So if this happens again, it happens again, I'll come back into the room. But just stay in the room. Don't
Okay.
leave,
Yeah, no
right?
problem. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, internet is beyond our control.
Yeah.
I'll just conclude by saying my personal experience with Islam has been basically completely positive. With I've had Muslim friends, university, I've done interfaith, I've went to mosques. I've never really even had like a dispute or a fight or a bad interaction with a Muslim. Yeah, I know. Like, I mean, we could talk about Israel and the war, and parts of the conflict. And I was mentioning like the interfaith. Like respectfully, just say, well, this is what I believe. This is what we agree about. This is what we disagree about.
Yeah.
And we're better off if we're just straightforward and be like, well, no, like my theology teaches this, and that's contradictory. And to be respect and treat people the way they want to be treated, you have to know their belief systems. But like I've been to mosques tens of times. I even have on my YouTube channel multiple events from inside of mosques. And like I said, I've always had good dealings with Muslims, although I'm also extremely familiar with, unfortunately, what's happening in Israel and the war going on. And prejudices in America and among Jewish people at large. So like unfortunately, there are a lot of Jews who do harbor, and Americans, Westerners who do harbor prejudice against Muslims.
Yeah, speaking about prejudices, unfortunately, I think if you come to Malaysia as a Jew, you will face a lot of prejudice here as well. In fact, generally Malaysians are, I hate to say this, but generally the ignorant ones would be very anti-Jewish because they associate. It's not because they are anti the religion, all right? It's because they associate Judaism or Jews actually with Zionism. So they can't separate the two. Okay, some of them, or maybe a large majority of them, would be unawares of the anti-Zionist movement. So if you come to Malaysia and you identify yourself openly as a Jew, unfortunately that would cause a lot of problems. However, there has been Jews who have come to Malaysia. If they don't openly identify themselves, then it's fine. They can walk among us freely. We don't really care. We are very peaceful in that sense. but because of the perception that Zionism equates Judaism, or that a Jew necessarily means that he or she is a Zionist, this has colored, the perspective of the majority. Of course, obviously, I don't believe this, because I know that there are people like you who are anti-Zionist. I am pretty much well versed in Israel, in the history of Israel, in the history of the Jews, and also what is actually Zionism. To me, Zionism is a secularist ideology which has nothing to do with Judaism per se. Right. So perhaps this is also your position. I wouldn't know. But in any case, okay, since we are on the subject of Judaism and vis-a-vis Islam, I believe that in Judaism there is this concept called the Noahide laws. So perhaps are you familiar with that? And what would be your perception of Islam in that context? Would you say that Islam adheres to the Noahide laws?
Generally, I mean, the Noahide laws are conceptually just historical. So if you're a believer, you're saying that factually Noah made a covenant with God that all humanity is bound by. And, so if you're a believer, that's a historical fact. It's not part of Jewish theology. It's independent of Judaism. That, Noah's covenant with God and his descendants' covenant with God has nothing to do with Judaism. It's just a historical fact. But obviously most people don't believe in Noah and that cosmology. So you're gonna look at that as some part of the Judeo belief system and the cosmology. In terms of are you familiar with Claire Caw?
I'm sorry.
This woman, Claire Caw, secular Pranism, the British, she's actually Chinese Malaysian. Unfortunately, you're freezing up. I couldn't even hear you.
That's really bad.
Unfortunately, you're still frozen for me. If you test. I got you frozen. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if you're hearing me or not.
Hear you.
You're coming in and out. I'm not sure if I got your video frozen and your voice is. Oh, now you seem back. Or no, I'm sorry, he's back. Okay, yeah, I guess I'll have to edit this. So
my internet is really bad now. I don't know why. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you fine now.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about this. I think this is going to happen throughout our conversation. So I hope you don't mind. Just bear with me, all right? Yeah.
Okay, you'll be able to edit this.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. That's the reason why it's recording. Thank God.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. You're talking about Claire just now. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, you are familiar with her?
Yes, I am. Very much
Okay,
so.
I mean, just because she's always talking about the Noahide laws, and I guess she happens to be a Chinese Malaysian, and I don't assume you agree with her secular Quranism, but
no,
or her interpretation of Noahidism. So I'm always explaining to her that to some extent it doesn't really matter from most perspective of Jewish law if a person is Noahide or not. And she's always talking like idolaters, and relatively Judaism, generally Jewish law, you treat people based on track record, not belief. So in terms most Jewish law would refer to doing business with other people, and in the in the aspect whether a person's, let's say, an idolater, or even if a person's a criminal in other matters, can you do business with them? That's going to be based on track record. So the question whether Islam is Noahide compliant or not, does it actually matter? Is that my place to judge? And so relatively no, I mean, that's between you and God. You have your independent obligation to meet these minimum standards, and that has nothing to do with Judaism. That's between you and God. And then if a Jew is dealing with a non-Jew, there might be certain laws, like, for example, can you enter a mosque? Can you pray in a mosque? Can you like eat the food of a Muslim? Can a Muslim be trusted to um, like serve your food, or certain levels of that? There might be certain aspects, but I say the majority of people hold that most Muslims are Noahide compliant in terms of meeting the standards of the Noahide laws. I mean, it doesn't mean that you think that Islam is true. It just means that like the 7 laws that Islam meets that minimum standard.
So you mentioned something about the Noahide laws here. Go ahead.
Yeah. So nice to talk again. Yeah. So yesterday we were just giving an overview of the Noahide law in terms of
Yes.
the belief system. So there's sometimes something related but separate, which is called like the righteous among the nations. And there's a dispute among Jews, specifically whether the righteous among the nations means someone who has specifically good relationships or goes above and beyond for the Jewish people, or whether the righteous among the nations has nothing to do with the connection to the Jewish people, but would be in a, a person's righteousness, that like even in Malaysia, if you have no contact with a Jew, or doesn't necessarily mean giving special treatment to a Jew. In fact, should treat all people fairly, and if a Jew is not acting accordingly, you should treat the Jew according without any special status. So that would be the version I would hold towards that. But you have a large contingency of Jews, and you could see the effect of U.S. politics or global politics, where righteous among the nations specifically refers to how you treat the Jews. But among the Noahide laws, the most ambiguous of them, and the most important, is the obligation to establish courts of justice. That means like you as an individual have an obligation to have a just society and make rules, and even enforce those rules as necessary of justice, and that could come in different forms. And so a lot of Jews, God forbid, might try to manipulate that and say that means you got to treat the Jews special. But I would disagree and say that that means you have to create a fair, transparent system of rules, and the Jews should be treated as anybody else according to that fair, transparent system of rules. And the Noahide laws also play another part in just the belief, because like the eschatology, what's going to happen at the end of days, and because like day-to-day practice does not necessarily intersect with what we believe is the prophecy are going to happen at the end of days, but presumably the prophecies, eventually there's going to be some sort of one world order where all righteous people serve God, recognize the same God, and the people who are more righteous according to the Noahide laws are closer to that than Islam. So Maimonides' famous statement that he says about Christianity and Islam, that I mean, from Maimonides' version, that in the end of days, Muslims will recognize the true Jewish Messiah, and they'll just recognize they made small errors. So you say, okay, you've been a Muslim, maybe your family's been Muslim for over 1,000 years. And you just say, my parents were basically correct, my ancestors and teachers were basically correct, but they just made small mistakes, and then that they could quickly come into adapt to the Messianic times. And Maimonides puts together Muhammad and Jesus, both in a sense of these kind of double-edged sword leadership that prepare the world for the eventual Messianic era, although with what we call like small errors.
Very interesting. So yeah, since we are talking about eschatology and about the concept of Messiah, perhaps you could elaborate on the Jewish concept of the Messiah, and how does that contrast with the Christian idea of messiahship? Because I believe that the Christians believe that Jesus was the Messiah. We Muslims believe the same thing, although we don't attribute divinity towards Jesus alayhi salam. So perhaps you can tell me what the Jewish position would be concerning the Messiah. I know a bit about it. I think you believe that he would be some sort of king that will come down to, lead the Jews. But maybe there's something more to this that is distinct from the Christian conception of it.
Yeah, I mean, generally, like within the prophets themselves, there's a whole bunch of statements about Messiah and the Messianic era, and then there's also sages like Maimonides or other sages that delineate principles that could be deciphered from the prophecies, or the Talmud, Sanhedrin, chapter 11 also has a lot of statements about what's likely to happen at the end of days. You just say first step, because Messiah will be a prophet. The general understanding, there's a verse in I think it's Malachi or Habakkuk, that a general understanding that prophecy ended with the building of the second temple around the time of Ezra. So you had a handful of prophets like Daniel and then Ezra and Nehemiah, and then there's minor prophets like Malachi and a few other of the minor prophets. And I'm not exactly sure which one's the end, and there's interpretation. There's a verse in a few of the later prophets that is understood to say this, that prophecy ended, was no longer part of the world, and there will won't be another prophet till Messiah. And so by definition, that would mean that Muhammad cannot be a prophet, Jesus cannot be a prophet, because prophecy ended and there's not going to be another prophet till Messiah. Although Muhammad could be a prince, like, because there's the Abraham and Hagar, and the prophecy that Ishmael is going to be the father of nation, including 12 prince. So you say that many Jews, many Kabbalists, many sages do believe that Muhammad was one of the princes promised to Hagar and Abraham, but definitionally say he can't be a prophet, because like definitionally there's no such thing as a prophet after the closing of prophecies, and Messiah is the transitional figure to the utopian end of days society. And the Messiah doesn't necessarily do anything special, just emerges as the clear leader who is at the forefront of this change that includes things like returning the Jews to the laws of Moses, ushering in order, world peace, universal recognition of God, and eventually rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. But it's not necessarily like Messiah is not expected to do these things himself. He's just kind of the prophet, the leader that emerges, and it'll be collectively the Jewish people that do it. Although the Messiah will arise at the forefront, and then within most of the belief, there's going to be a fundamental change in humanity. Then you have all the prophecies in Isaiah and others that talk about maybe even the end of life and death, and old age and disease, and eventually the resurrection of the dead, the lion lying with the sheep, and the wolf with the lamb, and these metaphysical changes where the earth will basically be a completely different place. And so from that perspective, most Jews would say there's no special status at all to Jesus. There's dispute whether Jesus was a false prophet. Maimonides, God forbid, says that Jesus was a false prophet and was properly put to death according to the laws of Moses, being that the punishment for a false prophet is death prescribed in Moses. But there's other rabbis that question whether Jesus even existed, or maybe he was like a legitimate rabbi and a good teacher. And there's a lot of dispute. There's no clear understanding among the sages how to understand Jesus, and there's a lot of controversy from apologists to even hatred, and saying Jesus was a nefarious figure. Muhammad's coming later, so and so to say, most Jews would say the Messiah that's prophesied in that we believe is going to come, that's clearly not Jesus, because like the Messiah of the Jews is going to win, not lose. So like from a Jewish perspective, it's almost ridiculous to think Jesus is Messiah. Like he gets killed, he loses, and the Romans conquer us. And like, I mean, there are some verses you could read in Isaiah and others of the suffering Messiah, but I mean, Jews generally look at the overwhelming scriptural evidence and the statement that like Messiah is going to lead us to victory, not to defeat. And so clearly Jesus can't be Messiah. Muhammad is not, he could be a dispensational figure, like an important figure for the unveiling of history. Muhammad is different because Muhammad is actually prophesied, so to say, in the books of Moses. In the Matt, we can look at the exact verse if you want, but the 12 princes, when Hagar cries
in Genesis, right? Yeah, in
yeah,
Genesis. Yeah, I think it was in Genesis. Yeah,
Abraham cast Hagar out, and she's in the forest, and she cries, and God comforts Hagar and says, don't worry, your son will be the father of nations and 12 princes, and that understood that Muhammad is one of these 12 princes that is prophesied and will play an important role in the development of mankind dispensation. And Ishmael's descendants are actually traced in the Bible. Throughout Chronicles and all, the Bible makes a point to trace the descendants of Ishmael, and also makes the point to trace the descendants of Esau. That from the prophecies of Daniel, kind of like the Armageddon, that there's going to be two major forces, and kind of Esau becomes the dominant force of the west of Rome, possibly the church, and Ishmael becomes the dominant force of the east, and the two dominant forces, if you want to look at east or west, or sometimes north and south, or Christianity and Islam, and that becomes the dominant interpretation of scripture for the various prophecies, and like Yechezkel and Daniel, that talk about these two forces leading up into messianic times. That would be a Judeo understanding that would not, I mean, that's obviously not what Muslims believe, but there is some parallel between what Jews believe and Muslims believe in the importance of Christianity and Islam, and how that's going to unfold at the end of days.
Oh, interesting. By the way, I don't mind if you want to be a bit more critical of Islam. Don't worry about don't worry about that it might offend my feelings or whatever. This is an open session, so if you want to be a bit critical of Islam, it's up to you, because I want to hear the Jewish criticism of Islam, and maybe even of the Prophet, because I'm always curious to know about, because I'm already familiar with what the Christian criticism of Muhammad is, of Islam is. So I want to hear the Jewish understanding, and perhaps even criticism of Islam and the Prophet. Although maybe perhaps I believe that our relationship might be even a bit more stronger, because I do think, or I do have this idea that Jews are more amenable to Islam. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I mean, generally you have a respectful disposition towards Islam. However, if you look at Islam as a lot of my rabbis would refer to the Ishmaelites, so they don't necessarily
I'm aware of this.
Muhammad or the Quran in the sense of being some sort of unique prophecy or message, and could be a revival of an Abrahamic tradition, because like saying, most mainstream understanding is Jacob is the first Jew. So Abraham was not a Jew, and he's the father of nations, and Isaac is also the father of nations of Esau, and Jacob is the first Jew. So that Ishmael and Muhammad is preserving Abrahamic tradition. However, and Abraham had deep love for his son, and Ishmael was known for the deep respect he had in honoring his father of Abraham. However, the Bible, at least the Mosaic version we have, does make criticisms of Ishmael's behavior, and that's part of the reason why Sarah has Hagar and Ishmael cast out of the house. And so a lot of the rabbis would look at, a lot of times, Arabs or Muslims in general as displaying the same negative and positive characteristics of Ishmael. From a Kabbalistic spiritual version, to say, okay, like you're not Arab, you're not Semitic, but you say, okay, you're under the dominion, the influence of Ishmael, and that goes to the prophecies where at the end of days you're gonna have the world is basically going. You have the Noah and the 70 nations, and half of the nations are going to be under the dominion of Ishmael, and the other half of the nations are going to be under the dominion of Esau. In the various nations, if you're under the dominion of Ishmael, and say Malaysia would probably be understood to be a nation that's clearly under the dominion of Ishmael, and therefore would represent the positive and negative qualities of that. But then you could say, well, you probably have a strong legal system and respect for generally Abrahamic law.
Oh, that's a very interesting perspective. Okay, so yeah, I think I wanted to ask you a bit more about your mentioning the ending of prophecy, the ending of prophet. Perhaps you could elaborate what would be the Jewish understanding of a prophet and who did it end with, and maybe perhaps you could cite the sources for that say this. Yeah, because I'm curious to know. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it is in Judaism, it's an open-ended thing, right? That prophethood is pretty much untouched, or something like this. Maybe you can correct me on that. Yeah, I'm curious to know about it. Yeah.
I mean, to say the general Jewish conception is that prophecy ended at when the second temple was rebuilt, and there's a verse that hints towards it. That, like in the Talmud, it says, prophecy ended, and it quotes this verse. And you might look at the verse and be like, well, I'm not so clear that that's what it's saying, but that's what the rabbis interpret it.
Yeah.
From a Judeo perspective, there's two aspects. Like, we have a system of following the sages of the generation. So, we learn from the prophets and the sages, and there's precedents. We consider there's a decrease in generations. People are further away from God. However, you don't look into the Bible and do what the Bible says. You follow the sages of this generation, and law is purely derived from Moses. So like Jews, we follow the laws of Moses. There's the concept of Abrahamic law, and we say, like, okay, as Muslims, you have a tradition of Abrahamic law, and that's parallel to the Mosaic law. But Moses was the only lawgiver. None of the other prophets were lawgivers. They just gave, they were just great leaders who gave moral, ethical, spiritual teachings that could help a person. But law is only derived from Moses. So in that sense, the prophets are not actually that important. I mean, we read the prophets, you could lessons, but you say, well, what about this verse? What about that verse? So like, well, what about it?
Yeah.
Like, okay, maybe like we believe, like, okay, the prophets might talk about the end of days, what's going to happen about eschatology or something like that. But to a certain extent, like, eschatology doesn't matter. Like, like in the sense of what am I required to do in my day-to-day life, and mostly legalistic. The eschatology is just a belief system. So in that sense, the prophets, there's different levels of prophecy. The Talmud, Maimonides codifies it. There's, Moses is believed to have talked to God face to face, whatever that means. And that was the highest level of prophecy. Other prophets heard a version of God's voice, were given message in dreams, or different versions where they were basically, giving to man the message of God. So if you, like, Muhammad is believed to have heard the Quran, or transmitted through the angel Gabriel, or something like that, as opposed to Moses, who spoke to God face to face, whatever. And so there's various degrees of prophecy, but say Moses is the head of all prophets, and in the same, like, you want to know what to do as a Jew, you should follow your local rabbi. And how your local rabbi, or board of rabbis, if you're in a town that has a large Jewish population, there's probably a rabbinic court, and then there could be 70 or 23 or 3 people to make a rabbinic court, and everybody should become learned and should try to become a rabbi and try to be a leader. And the rabbis derive from the best of us, and the leaders of communities will consult with international leaders. They'll go to rabbinic conferences. They'll read the responses of the leading rabbis. They went to the major rabbinic training school. Like, okay, I studied in Jerusalem for 3 years, in New York for 10 years, and I personally assisted many of the major rabbis, and they're always getting together with rabbis. And probably like in Islam, most rabbis have open hours to the public, and there's long lines of people asking them basic questions, or asking to pray for them, or just asking a lot of times just legalistic questions, but also times putting their life in the hands of the decision making of the sages, or resolving disputes. But like in that, to that sense, there's canonized texts that have become Jewish law books, and scholars like, okay, we study the Talmud, but you don't do what the Talmud says. You do the most recent codified, canonized legal text. So like at this point, you might still like study from a canonized legal text that was written like 100 years ago, and the stuff that's not applicable, and then there's commentaries upon commentaries. But basically, you don't look at the prophets, or even Moses or the Talmud and make up your decision. You do what's in line with the local community, the local rabbinic leadership, and you trust that the local rabbinic leadership kind of has the divine providence help of God. And then we could talk about how the rabbinic leadership, how they go about making their decision, and they have to be great scholars. They have to know the whole history, the whole corpus, from Moses, from the creation till today, and how the laws have changed over time. And they have to make these difficult decisions of to make the law applicable for the people in the place that they live, in the time that they live.
Okay,
Which
very,
would come on
very
like
enlightening.
something like, we'll talk about Zionism hopefully, but something like, well, where you have something where you have a major issue that, like, God forbid, a war, and you have rabbis say, well, the state's illegitimate. Or in Israel, you have a war, and saying, like, you say, well, do you send your kids to fight in this war, or do you refuse to fight in this war? And then, can you actually have consensus? Because like Messiah, theoretically, there's going to be consensus, but like from the beginning, there's never, Moses even had detractors and battles, and so like Messiah, there'll eventually be consensus. But how do you deal with a situation where there's not consensus, and even the difficulties, like I was saying last time, how I have as an anti-Zionist Jew, where there's basically everybody in the community has basically supporting Zionism, including the majority of the majority of the senior rabbis.
Okay, yeah. Before we get into the issue of Zionism and its relationship to Judaism, I wanted to ask you I just want to reconfirm with you, and perhaps maybe you could even elaborate even more. So, I believe that from your explanation just now, you don't have any problems admitting or accepting that Muslims are basically following the teachings of Abraham, and that the Arabs were the descendants of Ishmael, and that the Muhammad. Okay, you don't believe him to be a prophet, that's all right, but you believe, or you do accept, that Muhammad was indeed a descendant of Ishmael and Abraham. You don't have a problem with this, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I would fully confirm that. So say, like, I would actually confirm large aspects of Islam to be true, although I might argue, or the Judaic confirmation would not be the same as the Muslim belief. But like I said the other time, in terms of the Noahide law, generally the law dealing with individuals based on track record. So like, I deal with people based on track record, not on their belief system. So you could be Hindu, you could be an atheist, or various things, and you say, and you might, based on group identity, give someone more chance or less at the beginning. But beyond that, it's completely based on track record, not belief system. And so I've personally had very good experience with Muslims, and generally find but it's like, if you put it in a simple way, like most Americans, like, okay, my dad's not actually a religious man, he's a medical doctor, he's agnostic, although he's been supportive of me being more religious. And he would phrase it kind of an American way, like, well, like, if Jesus makes you a better person, I'm for it. If Muhammad makes you a better person, Buddha, if Krishna, or atheism, and kind of the matter, like, I don't care what you believe, does it making you a better person? In that respect, you say, like, Islam is a legitimate system to help a person be a God-fearing, charitable, moral, ethical person. But by no means should you assume, just like a Jew, you can't assume that, like, you can't, you have to, legalistically, you treat people based on their track record. So like, and that it becomes somewhat irrelevant. Like, I mean, you could give a person a chance, give them a try, and if you might even give them 2 or 3 tries, and then they have a track record, and then you're going to treat them on their track record, not based on their group affiliation. And I don't know, I've spoke to Muslims who have tended to agree with this assessment.
Okay, yeah, I think in Islamic history we do have a good track record with the Jews, although I mean, not let's not touch on the
well, I would say
on that subject yet.
Well, I'm saying individually.
Yeah, I mean,
you treat
individual
as individuals based on track record and their group affiliation. Once they have a personal track record, their group affiliation largely becomes irrelevant.
Okay.
So, I mean,
I understand. So it's on the you mean it's on a person to person basis, right? That's what you mean.
Yeah. So, like, okay, can you trust this person to babysit your kids, to cook your food, to do business with? And like, the first time, or once you trust them, but once they drive track record, like, you could have a Hindu or a Chinese or a Muslim or a Jewish babysitter if they've established a good track record. And and you can't, like, that would be unwise to say, well, I'll let a person babysit my kids if they're Muslim, and say, like, no, I mean, God forbid, anybody could do bad things, and you need to individually establish a track record. So, like, Jewish law is very, like, not all Jews, like saying, not all Jews are familiar with this, have studied the law, or understand this, and do harbor prejudice. But Jewish law is very careful about that, and saying, in terms of your individual interactions with people, it's not based on their group identity or their belief system. It's based on the track record that they establish.
Okay, interesting. So
you say that, like,
so
I trust Jewish people. You say, like, no, you shouldn't trust. I mean, you could judge everybody favorably. However, trust is something that's earned, and you shouldn't trust someone because of their group identification. You should only trust somebody that's earned it through over a period of time interactions.
I see.
But I say most Jews are unfortunately, most Jews are not scholarly, and they don't know the legalistic aspect of what I just said.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much normal, to even in the Muslim nation, in the Muslim world, you will find Muslims who are not familiar with Islam, although they claim to be Muslim. So I think that's across the board as well. Okay, I've met even people who claim to be Christians, but they don't behave as how Christians should be. So I think this is not just applicable to just the Jews. So yeah, but I wanted to ask you, what would be your understanding of the Jewish relationship, in history, historical relationship of the Jews with Muslims and Islam, throughout the Islamic golden age, or during the times when Muslims were had a khilafah and were pretty much controlling nearly half the world. So what would be your understanding of it and the reading of it? So perhaps you have your thoughts on that. Yeah.
Well, I said, like, if you're looking on individual relationships, there's no really such thing as Jewish Islamic relationship. There's just individual relationships that a person might have with individuals. So when you be talking about these group relations, usually you're referring to situations where you have a Muslim nation or Muslim community
Yes.
in a Jewish community that acts as a unit and would have like official measures. So, if you're looking like, okay, there was a caliphate or there was a Muslim community and they had a leadership and they made laws governing the interaction. So, so it wasn't just how individuals interacted, but there was some sort of basis for how people interacted that was determined by, larger legal bodies. And, then it'd have to be situation by situation. And then, God forbid, you could also be in times of conflict. So, I would try to, you have to be extremely careful with judging people as a group as opposed to individuals.
Yeah, you were saying, yeah, let's continue.
Yeah, I was saying you have to be extremely difficult judging groups versus individuals. And sometimes you could have time periods or where you have legitimate leaders who speak for a large swath of the community. So like here in Metro Detroit, I'm not sure if you have such strong leadership where you could, you might have some respect. So you'd have to historically be talking about like relationships between Muslim nations and Jews. And only recently do you have, Zionism, an Israeli state. And then if you're saying, well, I'm going to claim that that's not really representative of true Jewish beliefs, but it's a negotiation body that interacts on behalf of the Jewish people.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I switched to mobile this time, so hopefully it doesn't disconnect again. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think you're gonna have to repeat that again. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, I would say it's very difficult to talk about group dynamics versus individual dynamics. So you could talk about group dynamics where you had Muslim nations or Muslim communities that had a strong leadership that made rules that that at least dictated the overview for individual relations. And if there was tax or citizenship or war or conflict or court systems, and then individuals. So and then if you're talking historically, when Jews lived in Islamic nations versus Jews who lived in Christian nations, or like Spain, or even modern day states like Pakistan or Malaysia or Saudi Arabia, anything that you call versus if you're in Detroit and you might have Muslim communities that are different and Jewish communities that are different, and becomes the problem of Zionism. So the problem, like me as an anti-Zionist, where you have an entity that represents the Jews, that's not necessarily like a rabbi of respect, although many of the rabbis might have thrown in their lot with the Zionist entity. And then you're going to look at these group dynamic relationships. And then also, okay, God forbid, I've never had a bad relation or conflict with a Muslim, but a lot of Jews have conflicts with various Arabs or Muslims. And how does that deal with group relations? Like, God forbid, especially now in this time of genocide, or like the horrible act that was just carried out in Lebanon, or something like that, where I could say, well, yeah, I mean, probably a lot of my Jewish brethren were involved in that, and I might even personally have relationships with some of the people involved in that. I can say, it was not me, I don't approve of it, but where does that leave group dynamics or relationships? And it becomes extremely difficult. And you could look at Messianic and say, well, I still treat people as individuals, but group conflict makes okay. I mean, largely because I'm anti-Zionist, I've maintained most of my Muslim friends, but unfortunately, I've lost about half of my Jewish friends because the demand from my fellow Jewish friends that, like, we're in a time of war; these people are our enemies, and Muslims at a certain point, you say, like, well, you have a obligation to stand up for the Palestinians, or to denounce what just happened in Lebanon or something like that. And it creates a very difficult situation. You say, like, oh, you have individual Jewish friends that have a personal good track record with you, but God forbid, maybe they're going to sabotage your your pagers to put bombs in them, or something, like, it creates this horrible situation where
Yeah.
the sages should be trying to get rid of conflict at all costs, all costs. And when you have the sages accepting that you have group enemies, so most of the sages don't really talk about anti-Semites or enemies of the Jewish people, because that puts everybody in a bad relation. And theologically say, like, I don't have any enemies. I don't go to sleep upset at anybody. And however, group dynamics make that extremely difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're going to have to touch on the subject of Israel now. Okay, since it seems that we are moving towards that. So yeah, you have mentioned many times that you are anti-Zionist and that you are against Zionism. So how would you explain this to perhaps a fellow Jew or someone who supports the establishment of Israel? The usual arguments that I hear from from Zionists or from media which leans towards Zionism, usually like, oh, the establishment of the state of Israel was prophesized. It is the destiny of the Jews to establish the state of Israel, and it is the destiny of Jews to return to their homeland. This is the usual narrative. I'm pretty sure you're very much familiar with this narrative. So, as an anti-Jew, wouldn't that somehow make you cast doubt on your own position, or because you are a Jew. I'm pretty sure you have love for Judaism, and you do have love for for the land what we now know as Israel. I'm pretty sure this is an ingrained I think love
Yeah, I lived in
in
Israel for
your
3
Jews.
years.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
lived in
yeah.
Israel
So
for
so
3
maybe
years.
yeah.
Um,
Yes, yes.
I would
And
say,
so how would you? Yeah,
well, first of all, there's
yeah. Go ahead.
Zionisms. There's not really one universal form of Zionism, but generally the common element of Zionism. I mean, there's also aspects of Zionism in the Jewish religion. So I believe in the land of Israel being a special holy place. I believe in
Yeah.
the eventual rebuilding of the third temple on
Yes.
the site where there's currently the Dome of the Rock. Um,
Yes.
I
Yeah,
believe,
we
like,
call it yeah, we call it the Haram Ash-Sharif. So the whole area is called the Haram Ash-Sharif. So the most noble sanctuary. So that is what we
we could
Muslims
discuss that
believe. Yeah.
after. But
Yeah.
so Zionism, I would
Yeah.
say to me, Zionism has nothing to do with the Jewish religion. There's Zionism
Okay.
as a secular ethno-nationalism, and then there's religious Zionism, which I would say is a heresy, and say there's
Okay.
nothing in the Jewish religion that refers to a state. There's
Hmm.
parts about returning the priestly class, the Jewish people returning to the land, following the laws of Moses. But to me, like, I always thought I could live peacefully as equals with the Arabs. I don't, I didn't need an ethno-nationalist state, and there's no part
Okay.
in the religion that says that any part of the prophecy that says it's going to be some sort of ethno state. And
Okay.
so I would say against secular Zionism, that it's just a bad idea and
Hmm.
counter to Judaism. And religious Zionism is um, heretical. And then we're
Hmm.
talking about the group dynamics. It becomes extremely problematic, because
Yeah.
when you have an entity representing the Jewish people, and it's saying, like, now, God forbid, like, you might have an individual Jewish friend, and then you might have another Jewish person who has wronged you and developed a bad track record. But now it's saying Israel is committing war crimes. Like, God forbid, they're
Yeah.
stealing
Yeah.
land, they're committing wars, they're killing people, and it's became the worst ever. So I mean, if you look,
Yeah.
okay, like, God forbid, the history, 1948 and the
Yeah.
Nakba, but I
Yes.
mean, I think what's happened in the last year is the worst that it's ever been, and it's happening on my behalf, for something meaningless. It doesn't even benefit me. And saying, like, I don't see any reason at all for a Jewish state. Like, I do want to see the temple eventually rebuilt. I do want to do the rituals, but
Hmm.
that would be what I would say. Like, Zionism is just completely unnecessary, It's has nothing to do with the religion, and it's perpetrating basic crimes that not besides for Judaism that go against the Noahide laws. Like thou shalt not steal,
Mhm,
thou shalt not kill,
mhm,
and it was
mhm,
formed by stealing land from the
mhm,
Palestinians and killing,
mhm.
and these horrible crimes, and
Yeah,
they were done on my behalf for something that I don't need. I could be a perfectly fine religious Jew. Like I live here in Metro Detroit. I have mostly African American neighbors. I live in a
yeah.
Jewish community, but still majority African American. And so that's how I viewed anti-Zionism. So you
Okay.
have religious Zionists that have connected the that have incorporated the state into the prophecy, and
Yeah.
so that I would argue is heretical, and and that's maybe even more problematic than secular Zionist, because the
I
religious
see.
Zionists now all of a sudden they're justifying these crimes. So the secular
Yeah.
Zionists have they have to come up with some sort of secular, ethical, or
Mm,
atheistic
mm,
justification. And unfortunately, like in Israel, you see the rise of the extreme right. A lot of the worst offenders in Palestinian human rights abuses or warmongering are the
yeah.
heretical
Yeah.
religious Zionist, and so they're
Mm,
not. So if I would say, like, respectfully, eventually, we're going to rebuild our temple on the Temple Mount. But
yeah.
like the Lubavitch Rebbe said, like the Muslims are going to peacefully dismantle the Dome on the Rock and help us build it. Not through military
Mm,
conquest, but through like conversations like this, where Muslims eventually recognize, like, what, you're right. You guys should have the temple, and we're going to help you. We're going to dismantle
mm.
that, the structure that we have, and help you build that, as
Okay.
opposed through military conquest. And then, let alone, God forbid, the genocide that's happening, because people think that there's some religious benefit to having an ethno-nationalist state, and they've taken this religious fervor to, God forbid, genocidal levels.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. So yeah, I think I want to ask you about the third temple before we talk about the unfortunate situation in what's currently happening in Israel Palestine. So yeah, maybe you can tell me more about your perspective as an anti-Zionist. Okay, how would this third temple come about, and is it legal according to Jewish law to even establish some sort of authority over the site and forcibly build this temple? Because there are some attempts by, I don't know whether it was intentional or otherwise, but from the actions or from their actions it seems that it was, like people like Ben Gvir suddenly appearing on Temple Mount and bring the Haram sanctuary and bringing his settlers to provoke the Muslims, going onto the temple. I think there is a law, I'm not sure, maybe perhaps you could elaborate on it, which forbids Jews from entering the Haram sanctuary or the Temple Mount, as you call it for now. I believe there's such a law. So maybe let's talk about that. Maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, I mean, so the historical sages, rabbis, who many times are at odds, like the majority were anti-Zionist, and even till today, even if they work within the Netanyahu coalition, still have issues
Mhm.
with the Israeli state that held that it's forbidden for Jews to go up on the site. And like I said, Maimonides and the laws of Messiah, the mainstream understanding of the majority of the sages is that world peace and universal recognition of God come first. That
Okay.
eventually, like, yes, there will be the temple, it will be rebuilt, and the priesthood will be reestablished, and
Yeah.
the kingdom of David. But the prerequisite to that is world peace and universal recognition of God. Until that point, it's actually forbidden for Jews to go there. And a lot of the sages have actually said that, kind of theologically, that God put the temple site in the hands of the Muslims to help prevent Jews from desecrating it. So, like, Ben Gvir, you can see he's a clean shaven man,
Mm,
and he's religious, but he's not super religious. He's kind of like modern, incorporated this
okay.
new religious Zionism that is a form of modernism as opposed to the sages, but the sages are not the ones in control in Israel, and saying like rabbis in Israel, like they have chief rabbis, those are elected positions, and most of the so like the venerated historical sages have been more critical of Israel, and they're not the elected rabbis that are the official Israeli state rabbis, and so it's more just theological. Like, yes, I believe in the temple, but I also believe in the messianic prophecies, and that like you don't have to worry about me and the people who believe like me taking over the temple, because clearly there has to first be world peace and universal recognition of God. And like I said, like we'll have the temple when the Muslims decide to help us rebuild it, and when the Muslims recognize that what the world needs to move to the stage is the Jews rebuilding King Solomon's temple. And I've actually spoken to some Shiites and Muslims that have said that there's actually statements in certain hadiths or Quranic literature that also indicate that eventually King Solomon's temple will be rebuilt.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I was going to ask you a bit more about it. Or the question kind of slipped my mind. So anyway, let's I guess we have to touch on
Islamic I think it's Shiites more, that I'm not sure the exact text, but the Islamic understanding that at the end of days, or some part in the eventual eschatology, that King Solomon's temple will be rebuilt.
We don't have that in our. I'm Sunni, by the way. I don't think we have such a text specifically about the Temple Mount, because we believe that the Haram will be there. Okay, it's already built. So the eschatology from the Sunni perspective is more about basically about Jesus, because we believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So we believe that Jesus will descend from the heavens, and he will gather the Muslims, and he will defeat the Dajjal, or the Antichrist. You don't have the concept of the Antichrist in Jewish eschatology, do you?
Well, I mean, there are verses in. I mean, the concept of the Antichrist, like there are concepts in like Isaiah or Yecheskel or Daniel that could be understood that way. Are you familiar with Dr. Kevin Barrett?
Never heard of him.
He was a professor in America that converted to Islam. Now he lives in Morocco. He's on the Oons Review. He's pretty popular broadcaster. I might even be able to set you up. He has a weekly radio show, and now he lives in Morocco. But he was a professor of Arabic studies, and I think even independently, like already back in the 90s, he converted to Islam based on his studies, like even before much contact with an Islamic community. But now he's married to a Moroccan woman and lives in Morocco, and he's he has a podcast. He's pretty well known in various circles. But I spoke to him a few months ago.
I've never heard of him. Maybe you can set up a meeting with him. Can you set up a meeting with him, between me and him?
He's on Twitter. He calls Troop Jihad. I reach him through email, but I'll try to send him an email. I was speaking. I mentioned him because he's a nice man to speak to, a big scholar, and but we were talking about the conception, the Judeo conception, why you need the temple in the Mosaic law, where he wasn't exactly clear from an Islamic view, but I mean, according to Moses, atonement for sin necessitates a sacrifice, and necessitates the temple. And there's different levels of atonement, but like right now, with the temple being destroyed, we can't actually get full atonement for. I mean, there's certain sins that even sacrifices can't atone for, but that the temple eventually has to be rebuilt. Certainly from I hope it would be rebuilt in my lifetime, not just for some like messianic fantasy, but simply so that I could obtain atonement for my sins, because the Mosaic Levitical law states the atonement process requires bringing of these sacrifices, and I can't bring a sacrifice in my backyard. You could only bring the sacrifice in the temple through the ritualistic process. So the temple must be rebuilt, not just for the messianic prophecies, but just so an individual person could achieve atonement. And this is clearly written in the Mosaic canon, all these laws of sacrifices. And he wasn't sure whether Islam, wholeheartedly rejects the concept of these sacrifices or the level of atonement, to say you could achieve atonement without a sacrifice, and whether the Mosaic Levitical law was never valid, or if it used to be valid and now it's no longer valid, or if actually it is still valid. And like even you as you yourself, so to say, would desire the temple to be rebuilt, simply so that you could achieve atonement for, God forbid, any mistakes that you made in your life.
Okay, I think the closest concept of atonement that may meet your description in Islam would actually be Eidul Adha. Are you familiar with the festival of Adha, of Eidul Adha, the feast of sacrifice?
Yeah, I've heard of that, and I've been saying there's levels of atonements that you could just get through prayer or repentance without, or maybe through, like fasting on Ramadan, or like the Shiites who, God forbid, might whip themselves or do certain
that is not,
extremities.
we don't accept the matam. That is called the matam practice in Shi'i thought. We don't accept that as a Sunni. I reject that. In fact, in Malaysia, we consider the Shia to be officially heretics. Okay, we don't accept their practice here in Malaysia. If they, God forbid, if they were to appear here in Malaysia, we would ban them, and we would persecute them to the fullest extent of the law. This is how we view the Shia in Malaysia. But in the Middle East, I think there are Shias around, and the Muslims there tolerate them, okay, because they accept them. They accept the Shia as part of the society. But in Malaysia, we are a bit different. We are a bit, I would say, zealous, I guess, in terms of Sunni thought. So we don't accept any other, other versions of Islam as you make.
I mean, you still have austerities.
Consider it.
You still have austerities that are related to atonement. That, like, okay, God forbid, everybody makes mistakes and has to go through process of austerities to achieve atonement.
Yes, we do. Like, for example, you can fast, or you can do a sacrifice. When I say sacrifice, I meant sheep sacrifice or an animal sacrifice. We can do, you can do, there's this special prayer called Salatul Taubah. It's a prayer of 2 rak'ats, 2 units of prayers, which you can do personally to commune with God and ask for His forgiveness. So there are many ways to ask for repentance from God, but we don't actually have a specific a specific theological leaning where we need a temple to, or we need a place of worship to, even Mecca, for example. We need to go to Mecca, for example, and atone for our sins specifically. We don't have that. In fact, I would say Hajj, the practice of Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca, that's not really a process of atonement. That's more of a practice of worship and to connect yourself with God. So
but
it's
if
not.
you do a sheep sacrifice, I mean, that would just be a halal slaughter, and then the meat would be shared with the poor or the the local community.
That's right.
As
But
opposed to,
But the closest equivalent I can think of in terms of animal sacrifice would be during Eidul Adha, where where someone would sacrifice an animal, regardless whether it was a sheep or a camel or a cow or whatever animal there is, and then we distribute it to the poor, and we consider that to be an act of worship and perhaps maybe even repentance to God, but not in the same way as how you would view repentance. Yeah.
well, I mean, what's your view on the book of Leviticus then?
We don't have the laws of Leviticus in the Quran,
I mean, do you
because
think
our laws are based.
do you think the laws of Leviticus are forged or made up, that Moses never said that, or are you saying that Moses actually said that, and it's, or and it was applicable then but not applicable now? I mean, just in terms
My
of,
view would my view
just
would
the
be that
importance of the temple. Like, if
yeah
Moses, if Moses said it,
yeah
then you have the importance of the temple. So you say, I
Yeah.
don't know if you just reject, you think that it was corrupted and Moses never said the Levitical laws, or you think it was time constrained where the Levitical laws only applied for a certain, and like in King Solomon, like, do you think
I would say
King
yeah, I
Solomon
would say it's the
presided
latter.
over
Yeah.
these temple rituals
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
according to your understanding of King Solomon, did
Yeah.
King Solomon preside over these temple
Yes.
sacrifice rituals?
Yes. Yes, so I would say it's more of the latter. So we believe that whatever laws that Moses received, I don't have any problems with accepting the book of Leviticus and its laws, by the way. But from the Islamic viewpoint, I would say that this is specific for only the children of Israel, and this would have been practiced right up until the time of Jesus. I know that you don't believe that Jesus was a prophet, but in Islam we do. And since Jesus was a Jew, obviously he would follow the Mosaic law, and this would be applicable to the Jews of his day as well, even to his people, to his followers, right up until the time of Muhammad. And we believe as Muslims that when Muhammad came, only the Muhammadic laws would be applicable, and any other law. If you are a Muslim, then you are not required to follow the previous laws anymore, because the Sharia or the law of Muhammad has already pretty much superseded anything else. Yeah, it doesn't mean that the previous laws were wrong or anything like that. It's just that the Muslim laws or the laws of Muhammad, the Sharia of Muhammad has taken over the Sharia of Musa, the Sharia of Moses, and even of Jesus. Yeah, this is what they would be my answer, and this would probably be the Islamic position on this. Yeah.
Yes, I just brought up to mention the importance of the temple in
Yeah.
Jewish eschatology, and
Yeah.
not even eschatology, but just say that just as a person who has unfortunately committed sin, that I could do
Yeah.
things, I could fast, I could give money to the
Yeah.
poor, but
Yeah.
according to the book of Leviticus, the prescribed method for atonement is
Okay.
bringing
Okay.
sacrifices in the temple. So
Okay.
so you say the righteous person would
Yeah.
want to, and also it's just a commandment to say,
Yeah.
okay, like, it's good to, God's been good to you, and you have your wealth, and you're
Yeah.
going to, buy a sheep, and then you're going to feed all the local poor people in your
Yeah.
community. But
Yeah.
then there's also the level of, because some of the sacrifice that, the Levitical code, some of it was actually, you brought to the temple and then shared among the poor. Some of it was eaten by the priest, and some of it was burnt completely. And it wasn't all animals sacrificed. There was also grain or fruit
Okay.
sacrifices. Just to say, like, okay, God has been good to me, and I'm going to set aside something and sacrifice it to God.
Right.
And
Right.
not simply give, not just in a terms of charity giving to poor people, but even to completely destroy something,
Oh,
to say that
okay.
nobody will
Yeah.
benefit from it, because like I
Yeah.
feel an
Yeah.
obligation directly to to
Yeah.
God, and of that level that so
Yeah. Yeah.
there is no practice like that, but clearly that's
Mm-hmm.
what's prescribed in Leviticus and the later
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
prophets. That's how ancient
Understood.
Israel practiced. And you say, well, so are we going to return to that form of worship? So that would be
Yeah.
fundamental Jewish belief that really it's the obligation that
Mm-hmm.
like I mean,
Okay.
and you could understand the obligation to sacrifice. You say, but that's
Right.
not like to like a temple sacrifice, or the return to the ritualistic
Yeah.
Levitical code, and that extent it was sanctioned that you can't just make your own altar. You has to be done
Yeah.
actually on the spot, like, because the Dome of the Rock is not a mosque. There's the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is on the
Yes.
side of the Temple Mount,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then the Dome of the Rock is with the golden dome
Yeah.
is the
The
shrine,
stone. Yeah. The
the
foundation
stone,
stone.
and people make a circumambulation like in Mecca around the stone. It's not a mosque, and so
Yeah.
that where the people make the circumambulation around that stone is actually where the sacrifices would occur.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's interesting. That's illuminating.
But it's not actually
So
the mosque.
yeah,
Al-Aqsa Mosque
mm,
is not where the altar was. That's actually on the side of the
mm,
temple.
mm.
It
Yeah,
was
the one with the gray dome. Yes, I'm aware of that. Yeah, yes, of
yeah.
course.
So that's
Yeah,
all the way on the side of the courtyard. The
yeah.
temple didn't stand where the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It stood where the Dome of the Rock is.
Yeah, yeah. Some Muslims do get confused between the two, but yeah, but overall, I would say that we Muslims we consider the whole area to be holy because of its connection with the Israelite prophets, and also because we also believe, as I'm pretty sure you're aware, that Muhammad he when he did his Isra and Mi'raj, he traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem in one night. He reached the compound, and according to the hadith sources, he led the prayers with other prophets as well on the Temple Mount. Okay, and then he was brought up to the heavens from the foundation stone. Apparently, there is his footprint still existent on the stone. So that was where he stepped on it and he went to the heavens. And then the hadiths go into detail about that. So for us, it's also significant as well. So so that's probably a point of contention. However, I have no problems, for Jews to come to the Temple Mount and make their worship and connect themselves with the temple. However, I don't agree with what's going on in Israel right now, and I'm pretty sure you would agree with me that what Israel has been doing is totally abhorrent and horrible and goes against even your own principles here. So what would be your comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, God forbid, when I spoke to Daniel, he Kikuchu, it said,
Yeah,
from what my rabbi said, what I believe, what we're doing is so wrong that God will punish us. That God is just. God has a special place for the Jewish people,
yeah,
but God will not stand for injustice. And even if
yeah,
there's no current power, like Hezbollah or Iran, or Israel's the most mighty military power in the
yeah,
region. Even Iran can't really do that much. The U.S. is still
yeah,
backing, but
yeah,
God will take the side of the Palestinian people in this case. But because God will not stand by the Jewish people mistreating the Palestinian people.
mm,
And I fear
mm,
every day that saying that the nature of God is slow to anger and gives people a long time to repent, and
yeah,
how God's runs the world is beyond our control. But saying it's
yeah,
so wrong that I mean, it's unquestionable in my mind that God is going to punish us as the Jews for, I mean,
mm,
this genocide. Even like what happened in Lebanon the other day.
yeah, yeah,
Saying I'm saying even if those people, even your enemy, like blowing, like it was just a horrible crime that
yeah,
to me just is completely uh, against any moral, ethical
mm,
law. My
mm,
understanding of Judaism, and unfortunately, it's being done in the name of Judaism.
yeah,
And unfortunately, most of my fellow Jews support it. And because you could look at the prophets, like you look, historically, a lot of times the prophets, stood up for God and God's law against the majority of the Jewish people. And
yeah,
so let's say like Zionism is a heresy, but it's a heresy that's infected. So like in the West, you might have atheism or LGBT or
yeah,
transgenderism, or
yes,
these are diseases that infect people. And
yeah,
so Zionism is this horrendous disease and heresy that's infected almost the vast majority of the Jewish people, and it's gotten so bad where Jews are just blind to I mean, they're justifying genocide. It's horrible.
yeah,
And
yeah, yes, yeah,
I wish that wasn't the case. I've been anti-Zionist now. I mean, I grew up in Metro Detroit, and I liked Israel,
yeah.
and it was actually the rabbis in Jerusalem that taught me like anti-Zionism, and I just saw
Oh, okay,
I just see like I saw Arabs and Palestinians, and it wasn't as bad when I was there, but it's like we don't need it. We don't need this Jewish state. We could live as equals, and then um, I met old time Jews that lived under Ottoman control. Even
oh, okay,
like okay, the British controlled So I was in Jerusalem.
The British mandate, the British mandate, right? Yeah.
I think the British took over like during World War One, towards the end of World War One. So I was in Jerusalem in the late 1990s, and the old timers at that point, there were still people alive who had grown up under Ottoman control, and because once the British, and had basically lived peacefully with Muslim neighbors, where they lived in Jerusalem under peaceful relationships with Arab, Muslim, multicultural neighbors. Under the British mandate, there was already problems, and but this disease of Zionism has infected the majority of the Jewish people, and it's infected them so much, God forbid that your average decent American Jew, saying like most Jews I know, good people, they're charitable, they'd be nice, they but they're supporting this genocide, and like even what happened in Lebanon, they're supporting it, they're laughing at it, and I don't really have an explanation. But unfortunately, the prophets warn us about us. Say like, no, this is completely unacceptable behavior. God forbid, God is not going to let us get away with doing this. However, most of us, the Jewish people have been infected by this disease, and then you also have the heretical side now, where when Israel was formed, up to like 25 years ago, the vast majority of the rabbis and the sages were anti-Zionist, and then Netanyahu, Ben Gurion, he basically bribed the Haredim by giving them power in the government. And so, if you look at the Netanyahu Likud government, not only do you have Ben Gvir, but you also have the Haredim, you have the Hasidim, you have the ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they've been bribed with power. And now you kind of have like a welfare state where Israel supports a welfare state of the Haredim, and their leadership have been bribed. So, most of the sages, when I was, the sages I studied under, they'd all been trained in Europe. They'd lived through the war. They'd seen these horrible things. One of my leading rabbis, just died this last year at 99 years old.
Okay. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, my condolences. He was kind of neutral, but he was Rabbi Moshe Wolfson, and I met him in Israel, and at a big synagogue in Brooklyn. He would talk about the Ishmaelites, but he would warn about the dangers of Zionism and how God would punish us for this unacceptable behavior. He's the last of a dying breed. He was 99 years old, so he wasn't. There's a few people that were alive during World War II, but he was even like a teenager during World War II. But at this point, now there's really nobody who lived through World War II. There might have been people who were born or young kids, but who actually were young adults at that time. So now your next generation of rabbis, probably even the majority of say the sages, are Zionist, and so it's created this complete disaster situation where this unacceptable murderous behavior has become normalized, and then you're in a bad situation because you're supposed to follow. Maimonides said you have to trust in God, and if if everybody's unrighteous, you should move into the desert and just trust in God. But we're reaching a situation like that where even the rabbis have largely been corrupted by this heresy of Zionism, and it's even worse because most of the people supporting the worst of the human rights abuses now are actually the rabbis, even like the genocidal language, and then you have a heretical justification. We could talk about the rabbinic, the application of prophecy or mechanisms that Zionism as a heresy, how they might interpret Judaism to support, be like, no, Judaism supports genocide, or it's a messianic heresy, just saying as opposed Judaism has strong rules and ethical guidelines that you have to live by, but kind of say, well, the ends justify the means, and we're bringing Messiah, and it's really a disaster situation that I've tried everything I can. I've been warning against Zionism for over 25 years, and since the war broke out, I've been speaking out to the fullest of my ability. Unfortunately, mostly to deaf ears, and now, because it's a dangerous situation, where there's war and people are killing each other, and obviously, that like 10 years ago, like I would just we would just agree to disagree, but now generally anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, and that even applies to Jews. So if you're an anti-Zionist Jew, that's also like like beyond the pale. So it's extremely, I believe in God. God gives free will. How God to say God allows the suffering, or God is an understanding, but God is just, and there will be a rebalancing. And it's unfortunate because I mean, there's also like the Kabbalists that talk about the boom bust cycles, where like you're scared of a larger bloodletting of because people have to be righteous. People have to be able to live their life. People who work hard, that God has to reward the righteous and punish the wicked. And when society becomes so corrupted that there's really no mechanism to reward the righteous, there has to be a reset. And unfortunately, that is theologically the reason why we have this is God's mercy, because God is merciful and does not punish us instantaneously when we sin. God's nature, He gives us a long time to repent. And if we sin, we're granted a time to repent. And, shall we repent, the God through mysterious mechanisms will allow some sort of rectification. But at a certain point, if we haven't repented, God has to reset the system. And that's why, war or famine or these horrible things. And like, if you read the prophets, or, unfortunately, we're in an extremely dangerous position where you say, I would hope people would repent. But it doesn't appear to be happening. And then we could be facing a disaster where there has to be some sort of reset, and the reset is usually through some sort of mass bloodletting.
I think in Islam we have something similar to this. It's when I hear that you say that God gives time for people to repent, but if they do not repent, then God will send a retribution. This is very much it very much resonates with me, because this is exactly as what the Quran says, and this is actually what some hadith say. So we actually have very similar beliefs and very similar viewpoints with regards to that. So I wanted to ask you about, we have to touch about the war a bit, unfortunately. So I think you are aware that Benjamin Netanyahu, during the earlier stages of the war, he said he described the Palestinians as the Amaleks. He was talking about the Amaleks, and that we had to go against the Amaleks. How would you perceive that message, and do you think that this is a Zionist call for some sort of genocide or anything of the sort? In using religious terms, misusing religious terms, I would say.
So in the Bible, Amalek is like the great nephew of Esau from a forbidden marriage. And there's also like a lesson, because like it shouldn't have happened. Like, it was a mistake. And then he becomes this kind of like permanent enemy who creates a tribe. And then when Moses is leading the Israelites away from Egypt, there's a whole tribe of Amalek, and they attack Israel in the Sinai at their weakest point. And there's continuously like this bad blood, where Amalek just wants to destroy Israel. And God gives the commandment already to Moses that you have to destroy Amalek. Although the statement sometimes says in Hebrew, Timchas Zeker Amalek, destroy the memory of Amalek. And it becomes disputable whether it means like genocidal or to kind of transcend him. And then you have in the book of Saul, where Saul is commanded to completely destroy Amalek, God forbid, every woman, child, animal, and tree. And then Saul doesn't completely destroy, and he's punished for that. He takes mercy on, you got to, burn their trees and even their animals. And Saul is punished for not, fully committing this genocide. And this is a biblical story. So if you're looking like the sages divide all the commandments in Moses and say it adds up to 613, and one of these is the Amalek. You have to destroy Amalek. So there's conceptually this these biblical stories about the biblical character of Amalek, and then the tribe of Amalek, where there's constantly these wars, Saul's failure to completely eradicate them and being punished for it. And then which becomes canonized as a regular commandment that you have to remember Amalek and you have to destroy Amalek. So basically, if you're looking they're Ishmael and Esau, and we have some differences of opinion and up and down relations, but basically we could have largely harmonious relations that have a little bit of difficulty based on our different characteristics. But Amalek is beyond the pale and can't be fixed, is just evil and has to be completely killed, genocide, God forbid. So that it's straight stories in the Bible, biblical commandment. So as in a modern day perspective, there's a question whether the bloodline of Amalek still exists. Is Amalek an idea, or is it a bloodline? Was Amalek completely eradicated and it's just a historical thing that's recorded in the Bible? Or is there actually this bloodline? Or is it an idea? And if a person, contemporary usage, conceptually, it becomes a buzzword for genocidal action. And so, unfortunately, you have this negative tendency among Jews based on historical religion or superstition or history of persecution, however you understand it, where it's basically you have an enemy, and the enemy, like Cobra Kai or something, no mercy, and they must be destroyed. Women and children are fair game because they're gonna raise children that are gonna grow up to hate to try to destroy you, because like Amalek, even the women and children, even the animals had to be destroyed, because one remnant the child will grow up and when he grows up he's going to try to kill you, or the woman will bear a child that will try to kill you. And so it's a difficult thing to so if you're a biblical scholar or even a Muslim, you say I don't know if Amalek is mentioned in the Bible or the story of King Saul. But modern day, it comes to this genocidal behavior, unfortunately, among Israel. Say there's secular Zionism, where people just want a Jewish ethno state, but they don't really believe in the religion. And then you have the heretical religious Zionism, and Netanyahu kind of plays in between because he's largely secular, but he's teams up with the rabbis and his coalition. And unfortunately, there's a large segment now of Israelis that are fully genocidal, and the religious heresy could be much worse in terms of what you're looking on going on in Israel and the war and everything. The religious heresy of Zionism could be much worse because you have these biblical concepts that be genocidal, and that's where you hear Amalek, and then you could have people that God forbid. Because it's natural to have mercy on women and children, even just natural, like what happened in Lebanon, to say medics or just random people that you're gonna bomb them. God forbid, just it's just natural human emotion to have mercy, and just be like that's not right. How can you cause that suffering? But then you have this religious heresy of Zionism that would allow a justification to to even pin on these guys are Amalek, and therefore you're religiously required from God to commit genocide, God forbid. So it's unfortunate that for my you're like, okay, you're the Muslim apologist, so I'm the Jewish apologist, and I'm saying like that's not how I understand this, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, I'm saying that there Netanyahu has said this, and
Yeah.
maybe 10% of Israel believes in this religious heresy, where how is
Yeah.
it possible for them to have done all these at this point, and they're still going on, like the polling, and most Israelis are they're gung ho for this war, and part of it is this heresy, and the interpretation of um, a Moloch that
Yeah.
creates this behavior. But I mean, so a Moloch is a part of Jewish religion, and you could argue theoretically in saying if you believe these stories with Moses and the tribe of Amalek and King Saul, how you understand that, and then the perpetual commandment to, is there some certain circumstances where uh, this form of not showing any mercy is actually what God wants us to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Very enlightening. Yeah. So yeah, if you don't mind, I want to read a passage from this book. Okay. So this was written by a Muslim scholar and a Palestinian American scholar who has passed away in 1986. His name is Ismail Raji Al Faruqi. So the title is he wrote this book called Islam and the Problem of Israel. It's actually very interesting that you made mention some of the points of anti-Zionism because I think Al Mahum Faruqi he realizes this problem. He realizes that Judaism isn't isn't a religion which allows for bloodshed and murder or genocide against peoples. But he does condemn Zionism. He strongly condemned Zionism in this, and he even gave an Islamic perspective on it. But yeah, I think if you don't mind, I want to read a passage from this book, if you're okay with it. So
Oh, sure, please.
yeah, so he talks. I'm just going to read one section because otherwise it's going to take the whole book. Okay, I'm just going to read out a passage where he talks about the injustice of Zionism against Judaism. So I'm going to read it out, and I want to see what are your thoughts on it and whether you agree with him. All right. So he says the injustice of Zionism against Judaism. Firstly, Zionism interprets Judaism in accordance with a preconceived stand of European romanticism based on arbitrary feeling. It understands God's election of the Jews as racist superiority over all God's creatures and his covenant as irrevocable promise to his children, whom it ambivalently understands in biological and spiritual terms by referring to it as being in the flesh and independent of moral conduct. This is discrimination among God's creatures insofar as they are his creatures. Such discrimination is a reflection on God's nature, for the first and essential definition of God is that he is the creator of all. Zionism redefines God as the creator of all men in one way, but the creator of the Jews in another special way. This characterization reduces the godliness of God, i.e., his unity and transcendence, because it distinguishes contradictory defining characteristics in its essence. Thus, Zionism is an attack upon divine transcendence. This error, this blind judgment, which Zionism accepts absolutely and bases its whole life and world perspective on it, leads its adherent to a life of moral casuistry and turpitude. The very same cause led Nazi Germany first to extend its domain so as to have an empire. For there is no sense to racist superiority if there are no other races over whom to exercise that superiority, just as expansionist Israel has been seeking to do during its 30 years of history. Secondly, racist discrimination of Nazi Germany led it to commit untold justice against those of its own citizens, as well as those citizens of other nations who fell under her sway, who do not fulfill the requirements of racist superiority as the standard bearers of Nazism define it. The Holocaust of the Jews, the Poles, the Slavs, and numerous others followed with logical necessity once the premises of German racism were postulated. Likewise, the Zionist state has reduced its non-Jewish citizens to second status, confiscated their lands and properties, subjected them to martial law, jailed, banished, or executed them without process of law, all in the name of Jewish racist purity and Zionist political ideals. Regardless of whether these unhappy humans were Arabs or non-Arabs, Christians or Muslims, the discrimination is against them as Goyim, i.e. as non-Jewish humans. Indeed, the children of mixed marriages, whether the mother is non-Jewish, have been subject to the same discrimination in the Zionist state, recalling what a racist redactor had reported about an earlier occurrence of racist discrimination and disowning of legitimate wives and children. And then Al-Mahum quotes Ezra chapter 10 verse 10, FF, and Nehemiah chapter 10 verses 28 to 30. Being directed against humanity at large, racist discrimination is a sin, an injustice, of which Zionism is guilty on a large scale. Islam binds its adherents to rise against injustice wherever, whenever, by whomsoever, and against whomsoever it is committed. Thirdly, no racist regime can maintain itself without setting up an iron curtain around it. Its ideology cannot withstand alternatives, for it is arbitrary and dogmatic. Its adherents are necessarily single-minded and bent on intolerance of other views. It does not make its claims rationally, i.e. with evidence and in openness to further evidence, but doggedly on a take it or leave it, or if you are not with us, you are against us basis. That is why the Zionist state has been a police state in every sense of the term, placing those of its citizens who do not share its ideology in a category which amounts to a large concentration camp if they are Goyim, and under special supervision if they are Jews. That is also why no man, Jew or Goy, may settle in the Zionist state unless he adheres to Zionism's racist ideology. Differences of opinion with the ruling ideology may be tolerated to mislead the outside observer into thinking the state to be a free, democratic one. But such differences can only be those which refer either to strategy or incidentals, never to basics. The very thesis of Zionism cannot ever be put to question by those who dwell under its dominion. The policy of a Zionist state must therefore be isolationist, shutting its people off from the word of God, which challenges its essential doctrine. Wow, this is a very strong condemnation of Zionism. So what are your thoughts of it? This is a Muslim who wrote this in the 1980, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I basically fully agree. I mean, unfortunately, 20 years ago, like I used to always like I was scared that, say my biggest fear, because was that Israel was going to commit genocide, and that you would just start, determine that they need to get rid of them, and they're just going to kill them, and God forbid, now we're here at this point, and like I was using the the metaphor as a disease that spreads. It's a heresy, and the biggest problem, I mean, kind of along what he's saying is, which I unfortunately I'm basically in complete agreement, is Zionism creates this ends justifies the means mentality, and then it might start small, where you say, well, like the Messiah, like God promised the Jewish people the state, and something that should be absolute, that this behavior, like you can't steal, you can't hurt, you can't kill, these are absolute rules that have no exceptions. And so Zionism starts as these ends justifies the means exception, and the disease spreads, and now the ends justifying the means, and the means is genocide. And so you have relatively good Jews, doctors, people that worry about honesty and how they treat people, but they, the disease has fully infected them, and now they're to the point where they're supporting genocide because they say this heresy. Where I say, what I I don't need a Jewish ethno state. It has nothing to do with my religion and my service to God. It doesn't even benefit me in any method at all to have a Jewish ethno state. But this heresy that somehow you think we do need a Jewish ethno state, and then it becomes so important where it's justifying any means, and now the reality, God forbid, really the only method to have a Jewish ethno state is genocide. Ethnic cleansing, and ethnic cleansing fails, it becomes genocide, and so I mean, I recognized like the danger from my rabbis in Jerusalem who taught me this, the dangers of Zionism, and the possibility of genocide was real to me 25 years ago. And like, okay, there were a lot of human rights abuses. Like, okay, I was in Israel in the late 1990s, and like, okay, there was, I mean, it wasn't relatively, it was pretty bad back then. It was still like apartheid, and there were human rights abuses, but I mean, like compared to now, is nothing. And but I could recognize then that, like, God forbid, like at some point Israel's probably going to commit a genocide, and now we're at that point, and it's that's why this heresy, people have to, but the heresy is enticing. And I mean, I argue with atheists a lot, and say there is no method to sin and get away with it. And so you have basically Zionism becomes this heresy where you come up with a mechanism to think that you could sin and get away with it. You can't.
It's really unfortunate.
You can't kill and steal and get away with it. But but no, we're doing it for God. Like, God commands us to do it, and like in reality, like, no, I'm saying, like, I knew righteous Jews that were extremely careful in their behavior, and most Zionists are not really that righteous. They're more, it's more a disease of a heresy that's confounded by self-interest, not it's not like people righteously want to serve God, and it's like, oh, like, I don't want, we care so much about human rights, but God just demands this ethno state. It's usually so unfortunately I'm in basically full agreement with what you read, and it's very I mean, for you, and well, him as a Palestinian, he's suffering.
It's actually a very amazing book. It's actually a very amazing book, and if you want a copy, I can send it to you. If you want this,
I'll look it up and see if there's copies available here.
It may not be available anywhere else. It might only be available in Malaysia, because this copy, by the way, is a reprint of the 1980 book. So this particular copy was published in 2002 by a Malaysian publisher. So I'm not sure whether it's available in the States though, because the 1980 edition is totally out of print. Okay, they don't have that anymore.
It could be so if you online version or.
You can try to find it, but if you can't, I'm willing to send a copy to you, because I believe that the message of what is contained in his book should be spread. And Al-Mahum Faruqi gave a very deep and meaningful critique. Even for a non-Muslim to read this, would be enlightening for them. Although he gives it from an Islamic perspective, of course.
Zionism. I mean, because I mean, the majority of my mentors and friends were Zionists, and it was very difficult for me to, I mean, to some extent, like, the morality, because I had good rabbis, but like multiple times, like I was almost infected by, this disease, and then, then you get I mean, it's disastrous where, something that should just be pure moral clarity, that like this is completely unacceptable, to actually cheering it on. And it's unfortunate.
I think
Palestinian suffering. It's unfortunate for me just to be a Jew. I don't want to be guilty of these crimes, let alone to have compassion for the people who are suffering from these crimes.
Yeah, I understand. I totally empathize and understand with your situation because these murderous thugs are actually committing crimes in your name, which you do not want them to do, right? So I totally empathize with your position. Yeah, it would be the same as if some Muslim in some Muslim group like ISIS and Al Qaeda to mention a few. Yeah, so these groups are committing atrocities under Islam, under my name, which I do not want them to do. It's the same thing. I have the same feeling too. The horror and despair that I experienced when I saw ISIS killing Yazidis in Iraq. Just simply because they are non-believers. So I totally cannot accept and tolerate that. So I, as a Muslim, you know was offended by that, so I can imagine what you must have been going through right now. So yeah, so maybe I think it has been about 1 hour and 36 minutes. Maybe we can start to wrap this up a bit, but don't log off, right? So I would like to have a chat with you if possible after this recording. But yeah, so maybe you can share with us your thoughts on on the situation specifically right now happening in Palestine. What do you think would be the solution to that problem? Yeah, so I mean, probably not a political solution, but maybe perhaps a spiritual solution for Jews who may be watching this. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any good answers. I would say, as an individual, try to be righteous, fear God, pray, work individual relations. So
Yeah.
here, I try to help Palestinian students. I express my condemnation, outrage over what's happening, but
Yeah.
it's not really helping people in Gaza. And
Yeah.
to be disempowered. God runs the world, and
Yeah.
so just to share, the suffering, compassion, conversations like this.
Yeah.
I created my YouTube channel. Like I did interfaith for years, and
Yeah.
actually, the war broke apart one of the interfaith networks that I was part of because because of the war, the interfaith wasn't able to continue. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, God runs the world. We can't understand the ways that are happening, and it's not within our ability to stop all suffering. So fear
Yeah.
God, be the best person you can, and generally the sages say start in your own community, in your own area, in your own family. So sometimes it could be a diversion to a person's personal responsibility to
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm trying to stop what's happening on the other side of the world. So generally say focus on your community, and so on that level, like you know I try to encourage. I have on my YouTube page a few protests. I stood up for some Palestinian students. I have conversations. I like the Jewish Apologist, where I try to defend Judaism, but
Yeah.
try to be factual to say I believe that the true understanding of Judaism is not this, but factual in the attempt that unfortunately Zionism has almost completely taken over Judaism, although I think it's a heresy. Um,
Yeah.
and don't be discouraged. So like you
Yeah.
gotta have moral clarity. Like this is completely
Yeah.
unacceptable. But also, I knew a lot of people who lived through World War II and suffered, and a lot of Palestinians have a lot of dignity and still fear God. And
Yes.
I remember like World War II saying, uh, "Don't blame God. God's ways aren't our ways. God's however you understand how God's allowing this to happen, God is
Yeah.
just. God's mercy. God works in ways beyond our
Yeah.
understanding, and
Yes.
we're required to believe that God rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked,
Yeah.
although sometimes it
Yeah.
takes time and sometimes it's a little bit beyond our understanding, but you can't fall
Right.
into despair where you think it will. It looks like
Yeah.
God does. It looks like God punishes the righteous and rewards the wicked.
Yeah.
So therefore,
Yeah.
why should I try to be righteous and not be wicked? So I mean, that's the worst type of despair to fall into, and
Yeah.
take it as the fear of God, and
Yeah.
say I'm going to try to be the best person I can, and the fact that I can't stop these other people from doing these atrocious things, is all the more so. Like I was saying, like the rabbis, they're just the best of us. Why are these people the leaders? And just all
Yeah.
the more incentive for us to work harder and rise up and restore justice.
Yeah, yeah, and I do resonate with that, and we hope for the best for what's happening now in Palestine and what's happening to the Palestinian people. We hope that there would be a resolution, at least a ceasefire. Okay, hopefully, inshallah, it leads to that. So, anyways, thank you, Duvid, for being here. I really do enjoy your wisdom being in your company, and hopefully, we can have more interactions like this in the future, inshallah, God willing. So for those who are watching this, thank you very much for listening and tuning in. Hopefully, inshallah, there will be a future podcast with Dovid again. And yeah, so for those of you who would like to share this video, please do share this video. If you would like to like this video, please do so, and send the message, spread the message that there are Jews who are anti-Zionist, and not all Jews support Zionism. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again in a future podcast. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.